psychologist to sort of neuroscientist. So you may think that's a bit strange for a legal regulator to have a behavioural function. But hopefully today's session will show you how it's useful for us as regulators, but also useful for you as firms as well, raising awareness of your risk. So today's session, we'll talk a little bit about cybercrime and about why it's important as a risk, and then we'll talk about the impact of cybercrime on the legal sector and some of the different types of cybercrimes that we see and those that are most commonly reported to us. And then we will talk about some of the reasons why people fall for cyber scams and so on. So we'll move into the more behavioural aspects. So this isn't going to be a very technical session. We're not going to kind of advise you what sort of email server and firewall to be using. This is much more about things that you can do to protect your firm that are low cost and that are around the behaviours of you and your staff. And we've done some work around cybercrime, some behavioural trials, which David will talk to you about. And then following on from that, what the implications are that we found from the results of those trials for you and your firm. So the SRA, we authorise firms to practice law in England and Wales. We currently authorise around 10,400 firms. 750 of those are ABSs, and we authorise 185,000 individuals. Now, the legal services sector brings in around £30 billion a year annually. So that's a great success story for the sector. But it also means that because of the large amount of money that firms are bringing in and the information that firms hold that can be very, very sensitive about their clients, it does mean that you are a target for cyber criminals. So I don't know if you know, but in terms of cybercrime, it's now the most common crime in the UK. You're 20 times more likely to be the victim of a cybercrime than you are to be robbed in the street. So, and as I said, the reason that law firms are targeted is because they hold client money and they also hold lots of very sensitive information. If you think of the two biggest data breaches in history, the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers, both of those were law firms. And so with the Paradise Papers, it was something like 11.5 million documents were hacked and leaked. And the way that the hackers got into the firm was they went through the client email portal that they had, because they hadn't updated that for 3 years. So they'd kind of, you know how you get those sometimes quite annoying Windows updates and you think, oh, I'm going to skip doing that now because I want to shut down and go home. But it's very important to keep your computer up to date with the latest software, because within those updates, firms like Microsoft are releasing sort of patches and security additional sort of extras to make sure that the system is safe. So that was how they fell for that. So attacks obviously can threaten your operations. You can lose money. It also has a big impact on your reputation, and obviously the impact on your clients as well, with loss of money and also loss of potentially confidential information. So I'll just talk through some of the different types of cyber crimes and scams that we see at the SRA. So most people will probably be familiar with hacking. So this is when somebody gains unauthorized access to your systems. That's not necessarily always going to be somebody, cleverly hacking in. It can be just as simple as someone guessing a very weak password that someone in your firm may have. Quite often they can then get administrative rights and that means that they can change things on your system. So it's very important, as I mentioned with the Paradise Papers case, to keep your systems up to date and always to use fully supported software. So malware, so most of us will probably know malware more better as a computer virus. So again, this is when criminals attack your system and upload a virus. And quite often now what we're seeing is a pattern of what's called ransomware. So when a file is installed on your system, it actually starts deleting files or encrypting your files, and you'll get a message saying, unless you pay £3 million in Bitcoin, we won't release your files, or we'll carry on deleting your files. We have seen some cases where firms have paid out to the ransom, and unfortunately they didn't get the information back. So always be aware of that. But again, that can be through people sending an email to one of your staff with an attachment asking them to click on it, and then that uploads the file. So identity theft, this is when somebody impersonates a solicitor or a firm, and so we obviously, SRA put out bogus firm scams, and so people impersonate a solicitor and trying to infiltrate the firm and gain access to the client's account or to gain information about clients. And quite often these can be quite convincing if you think about how much information that you leave on social media, your sort of social media footprint, pictures of your children, your pets, other family members, where you went to school, where you've been on holiday. So people can create quite a convincing portrait of you to steal your identity. CEO fraud is another form that we see. So this is when the criminal sort of impersonates a senior member of the firm, so the CEO or a senior partner, and they will then ask a junior member of the firm to transfer money to an account. And because it's someone in authority, and we tend to have our behaviour is that we tend to obey authority, particularly when it's somebody who has power over our job. We tend to acquiesce and agree and do as we're told. So checks aren't always done, and then money gets transferred into the criminal's account. But by far the most common cybercrime that we see is email modification fraud. So around 80% of all of the cybercrime reports to us in the last year have been in this form. So this is where a criminal, either gets access to the client's email account, or they send an email to the firm claiming to be the client, and then request a change of bank details and say, send the funds to this account. And we often see this happening on a Friday. Often because that's when a lot of conveyancing firms finish their transactions, and that then gives the criminals the weekend a bit of extra time to move the funds. So that's the most common type of cybercrime that we see, and we found with cases of email modification fraud that banks and insurers may not often reimburse the firm the monies. So so I think hopefully you'll have seen that a lot of these, some of them are based on what you've done with your systems, but what criminals are doing is they're not necessarily primarily hacking the system. They have to trick and hack you and your staff to get to your system first. So this is where behaviour of you and your staff is really, really important. So the impact on the legal services market. So in the last year, we had 164 reports about cybercrime. So that's around 14 reports a month. And £6.2 million was reported to us as being lost to cybercrime. And actually, this is down. In the previous year, it was £10.7 million. So that's quite a good news story, though not for those who lost the 6.2 million. As I mentioned, most of the fraud is in the form of email modification fraud, and unfortunately that is on the rise, and that's increased by 23% in 2008 relative to 2017. So we did find, so previously a lot of the cybercrimes were aimed at conveyancing firms, and what we're finding now is that around half of the reports are from non-conveyancing firms. So it does look like our colleagues in conveyancing have got wise to these scams, but now we're seeing the criminals are moving to other kinds of firms that hold client money and taking advantage and tricking people there. So in terms of what action that we take, so as a regulator, we expect that firms take the most reasonable steps possible to protect against the theft of money and information. And where we have taken disciplinary action against firms, it's been a combination of sort of one out of sort of three things. So when they haven't taken reasonable steps, so when they haven't kept their systems up to date or taken appropriate actions to make information confidential, where they have not reported the breach to us promptly, or where they have not remedied the loss in a kind of proportionate and timely way to the client. So what we're doing at the SRA to support firms is that we do produce the Risk Outlook annually that has sort of top tips on how you can mitigate against the risk of cybercrime. We've also published last year a paper about legal tech and how you can use legal tech. And if you look in the back of that paper, it includes a sort of a chapter that was written for us by the National Cybersecurity Centre about cybercrime and the top things that you can do. And again, these are things where you don't have to spend huge amounts of money on firewalls. It's a lot of very simple things that you can do to protect you and your firm. As I mentioned previously, we also produce scam alerts. So that can be in the form of when we find that there's a bogus firm, so a website pretending to be a legitimate law firm. Though we've now, of course, released the digital badge, so we're hoping that that will reduce the number of bogus firms. And we're also doing some behavioural work in this area to raise firms' awareness of cybercrime. And on that, I will hand over to my colleague David Bish, our Behavioural Insights Analyst, and he'll tell you about why it is people fall prey to cyber attacks and about the research we've done in this area. So, thank you, David.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Can I hear me all right? Is that fine? So thanks, Deborah. Like Deborah says, this is going to be a little bit different to a normal standard cybercrime presentation. So what I'm here to talk about is why, or at least some of the reasons, people fall prey to cyber attacks, and some of the work we've been doing trying to think about that and improve the way that we speak to you. So like Deborah says, I'm David Bish, Behavioural Insights Analyst at the SRA, and I lead on a lot of this work we've been doing over the last few years. Oh, sorry. Oh, there you go. Hello, everyone, again. So yeah, like I said, I'm going to talk a lot about the behaviour, the reasons why people fall prey to cyber attacks, and then some of the research we've been doing to try and improve the way that we speak to you guys. So here are some of the reasons. Now, by no means is this a full list. These are just a few of the things that I think are really important to everyone, and particularly working professionals and solicitors. So first, we've got the context in which people make decisions. So firstly, like Deborah said, it depends on who's messaging you, whether you make a certain decision. So if I get an email from Deborah, who's my boss, I might take a different course of action to what she did if I emailed her, because what she says matters and what I say doesn't really matter so much. Also, we know you're really busy people. You have a lot going on. So in the context of how you make decisions, you've got loads of cases you need to do, so it becomes very important how you spend your time. And when we're talking about the way that people overcome these cyber attacks, it's really small moments of attention or inattention that leads to them falling prey. The second one, which is similar, and these are all kind of similar, is time. So again, like we said, you're busy, you only have a certain amount of time you can do these things, and a certain amount of time you can check what you're doing. And the way this all plays into it is behavior, right? So the final decision you make. And for a lot of these email modification scams and identity theft, it's all just a really small moment where that scammer manages to trick you into not checking who you're speaking to, and that's the reason why you might lose money. So when we started looking at this area, when I first started at the SRA, we looked at why we felt people were falling prey to them, what the biggest risk areas were, and we wanted to improve the way that we spoke to firms. So, as Deborah mentioned, email modification by far the biggest area of cyber attacks that we see, and there's this really interesting area of Friday afternoon fraud. So almost always targeted to conveyancing markets, and B, generally happens on a Friday. So we looked at a lot of the information that we were sending, insurers were sending, this kind of thing, and generally we found that a lot of the emails were a little bit boring, they were quite long, they didn't necessarily engage the audience, and they were quite restrictive, saying, check the identity, don't do this, don't do that, which we found they weren't engaging with the market. So what we tried to do is we tried to use communication techniques that were more interesting for solicitors, and more importantly, we wanted to test if, when we send emails, how does that affect what you guys do with it? So, like I said, we know it's a Friday afternoon fraud. Why are people sending emails on a Tuesday? So what we started to do was we took different groups of solicitors, or compliance officers, I should say, and we used variants of the same email, but sent them at different times of the week, and then we monitored how those kind of moved across the market. So did that compliance officer forward it on? Did they open it? And all these kind of things. So what I should say is over a 6-week period with 7,300 firms, we sent these emails, and one group didn't receive any emails, one group received them on a Wednesday, and the final group received them on a Friday. So bear in mind that all these emails were exactly the same. All they simply did was contain a case study at the start. So what I wanted to say is, you know what, look, here's a firm that has been affected by a cyber attack, anonymous of course. You are likely to be targeted, you are likely to fall prey to this stuff, so maybe just take that extra moment to check. And then we gave them some more information about forwarding the email on, passing it around, and how to report to us. So is the timing of emails important? Incredibly so. So in the first week of the experiment we ran, we found that culps were 4 times more likely to forward emails on a Friday compared to a Wednesday. Over the 6-week period, you see it kind of goes down a lot as people became, I think, a little bit bored of our messaging, but still on average, they were moving across the market or being engaged with about 2.5 times more by receiving the same email on a Friday compared to a Wednesday. So in terms of thinking about how you engage with your staff or your clients, I think this is really important. So building on this piece, we started to think of, all right, we've used the same messaging at different times. How does the actual messaging affect? So what we did over a 3-month period, we ran a very similar experiment, but this time, whilst keeping all the emails exactly the same, we changed the subject heading. So effectively, compliance officers would see a different title, and within the email, there was a different line which played on these 3 aspects. So the first group received the same email, but the subject heading said something along the lines of, please help the SRA to overcome cybercrime. The second group received the email which tried to play on like a fear factor. So it said, could you be next? Could you be the next people targeted? And the final one said, look, I know you're the culp, you know all about cybercrime and everything, but does everyone else? Does the guy down the hall know about it? Could he fall prey? If so, we encourage you to forward it on. So in terms of results, how does that change in messaging affect, bearing in mind all the content is exactly the same? So the one, I guess, main thing we learned from this is never ask anyone to help the SRA. You can see the 2 black lines there, by far the least forwarded on, the least engaged with throughout the market, which I hope we're now using in our general comm strategy. The second one, the fear factor, was about 1.5 times more likely to be forwarded on and passed around. And then final, when we kind of play on the superiority of the culp, it's hugely more effective. So something like 2.5 times more likely to be forward on. So it's just these kind of ideas that we're trying to embed in the way we speak to firms to make sure these ideas spread across the market, to eventually hope we raise awareness and that people kind of effectively change behavior and start checking what they're doing. So I wanted to, I guess, kind of give 3 top tips, which probably seem like common sense, but I guess it's always useful. So the first one is stay aware. So like Deborah says, it's the biggest crime in the UK. It really isn't if it's going to happen to you, it is when it's going to happen to you. In the same way, in your personal email accounts, I'm sure you've had scam emails. Businesses exactly the same. They will get through firewalls and that kind of thing eventually. And because they're not just targeting the general public, they tend to be a lot more sophisticated, so you really need to keep on top of it. The second one, complete the checks. Make sure you are checking who you're speaking to and all that kind of thing. And I guess the important thing here in terms of time and the fact you have other deadlines and stuff to stick to is that a really small time spent now can have a huge effect on the future. It's probably better, I would say, to delay a sale for half an hour and make sure you're speaking to the right person than to send 100 grand to the wrong person and have to deal with it later on. And the final one is I'd just say, like we've been trying to do, just raise awareness. And also think about how you do that. So you can see throughout these 2 things that we've done, even keeping the messaging the same, just by changing how we send it, the way we word it, and that kind of thing can hugely affect whether it really runs through the market. And I'd say first, it's helpful for us in terms of engaging with you guys. It's helpful for you if you want to spread, better behavior throughout your firms, but it's probably also useful for you when you think about how you speak to your clients and getting the best engagement from them. So with that, that's really all we had to say. So like Deborah mentioned before, we do publish a lot in the SRA's research team, not just about cybercrime, but AML, investment schemes, all these really interesting topics. We've released 2 papers in the past year, I think, focused on IT security and technology innovation. So do go and read them. They're really interesting. And yeah, I think now we'll take questions, will we? Hello. That's a really good question. Do you know it?
So I have to repeat the question for the YouTube audience. So the question was, what do the SRA do to make sure that the SRA systems are secure? So we do something called a phishing exercise. So we send out, unbeknownst to the SRA staff, a sort of a dodgy email, and then we see how many people click on it. And if they click on it, then they get some training on this kind of stuff so that they don't do it again. And in fact, we're going to be working with a law firm to carry on doing this this kind of research about cybercrime and looking at how a firm's interventions and training can help them combat cybercrime. But that's just one of the things that we do, and we have a very large IT team who keep everything all sort of secure. So, okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. So the question was, Cyber Essentials is a method to make sure you have a base level of training across your organizations. So we, as a regulator, we don't endorse any products. I know the Law Society, they do endorse Cyber Essentials, I believe anyway, and that's really their role. So I don't think there's ever going to be a time where we say, you have to use this product or this product. We just say that you need to take appropriate checks. And how you do that within your firm, that's up to you. Do you have a question? The gentleman said that recently you received emails which seemed strange. Your colleague mentioned it, and then the rest of your firm started receiving the emails. Yeah, perfect. So the advice was don't touch it all, and that's exactly what we would say. It's a really good question, and it's a question we've had a lot about when should you be reporting cyber attacks or cyber attempts. So we understand you're never going to be able to tell us about every attempted cyber attack because you'd be emailing us 100 times a day, and we don't expect you for you to do that. If there's an instance where an attack is successful, then obviously you need to report that to us. I think we are going to publish more information on this later in the year, I believe, but what we generally would say at the moment is if you're seeing things that are out of the ordinary, that you haven't seen before, which seems like a new scam, we would really appreciate if you reported that to us, because all the information you see here and the information we put into our reports is all based on what you tell us. So if we can identify those things early, because you tell us that's what's happening or that's the way the market's going, then that's really, really useful. Any other questions? No?
Okay, so if there's no other questions, just a final comment. So I was at a meeting a few weeks ago with the Serious Fraud Office, and they said that 80% of all fraud is fully preventable. It's all around people's behaviours. So it's really important that you train up your staff and you put the proper checks in. And then, like I said, you don't have to spend a lot of money. The Cyber Essentials scheme is very good, but depending on the type of work your law firm does and the size of your law firm, there's no one size fits all really. It's all about just keeping your people aware and keeping the checks in place. Okay, thank you.